Good afternoon. Welcome to the final webinar of the Partnership for Food Safety Education 2018 Behavior Change webinar series. It is my great pleasure today to welcome all the health and food safety educators who are very interested in behavior change and in design of their programming. I want to welcome you on behalf of the partnership. And we'll go through a few housekeeping things. Thanks again for being with us on behalf of the partnership. We work to develop and promote effective education programs that reduce foodborne illness risk for consumers. We're a nonprofit organization. We rely on contributed support, and we are very pleased to work with and serve a network of 13,000 health and food safety educators in the United States. Today, I want you to think about your questions because we have a terrific panel. To ask a question, use the question box or the chat box on the right side. You'll see in your console on the right. I also want to tell you that after the webinar, you're going to receive a survey. Please fill it out because it helps us enormously to know what you're interested in and what you enjoyed or did not enjoy about our webinar. So please respond to that survey. We are very pleased to offer CEUs today. I know how important that is for many of you who attend, so we want to make sure you get your certificate. You have several ways you can get your certificate. Download it from the sidebar here under handouts. In the follow-up email, you will have a direct link to get your certificate. Or once this webinar is posted to fightback.org under our events tab and our recorded webinars, you'll be able to get it there. We won't be able to answer all the emails about the CEU certificate, so please know that it's going to be easy to find and it's always available on our webinar recording page. But you might want to get it right now under handouts. We've had a great time with this series. We started back in February on the topic of social marketing. In April, we talked about behavioral economics, design thinking in June, and today we're going to do a recap of all of these topics. So thank you for being with us, and please know you can access the other webinars at our recorded webinar page. So today we're talking about pulling all the behavior change ideas together. And I'm so pleased today to welcome our moderator. She's Dr. Christine Prue, Associate Director for Behavioral Sciences at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She works to apply and advance the science of health behavior and health communications to prevent and control infectious diseases. Since 2008, she's led communications response efforts to numerous foodborne outbreaks. She's conducted research to develop messages promoting consumer food safety behaviors. She's guided communication of new scientific findings and led efforts to engage public health, industry, and consumer advocacy partners on several issues. She's with the National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So, Chris, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to have amazing speakers. And thank you to the partnership for launching this effort, because behavior change is what's going to get it done in the food safety world. So hats off to you for focusing on the science of behavior change. So really excited about that. I'm going to just introduce our speakers again. If you participated in the previous webinars, you've met them already, so I'll do brief introductions for those newbies. First of all, Kelly Dennings. She's the Director of Social Marketing at Action Research. Kelly is a results-driven change agent with over 17 years of project management and leadership experience, with 10 of those years focusing on communications and marketing for behavior change. She also is the past president of the Social Marketing Association of North America, leading the all-volunteer organization to bring social change professionals together for networking, learning, and collaboration for improved impact. And also an amazing collaborator for this series. The second speaker will be Richard Mathera. Richard is a senior behavioral scientist at Common Sense Lab. He is a seasoned professional with over 10 years of experience in the private sector, government, and nonprofits, with extensive behavioral science, finance, and evaluation expertise. Richard applies behavioral science and design at the Common Sense Lab, where he focuses on improving the financial decision-making of low and moderate income Americans. And lastly is Alexandra Bornkessel. Alexandra is the Program Director of Social Innovation and Digital Strategy at RTI International, where she marries marketing concepts with behavior change science to solve meaningful problems. Calling upon human-centered design methods, she helps organizations better understand and connect with the people they serve to create and design solutions together. So that's our esteemed panel of presenters and discussants today. Next slide. But practicing what we preach, we know that step number one in all things is to know your audience. So we want to take a little poll to see who has joined us today. So the question is, what is your profession? Are you in the cooperative extension, health communicator, or social marketer, nutrition and dietetics field, teacher, or other? So if you can respond to the poll, we would greatly appreciate knowing who has joined us today. So Michelle, issue the poll. And respondents, respond to the poll. Okay, let's see who's with us. Oh, nice mix of people. We have our largest group of nutrition and dietetics professionals at 44%, and almost a third of the other. That'd be interesting to know who those others are. A few teachers, and then a good mix of cooperative extension folks and health communicators and social marketers. So wonderful mix. Thank you so much for telling us who you are. We will keep that in mind as we move forward and share stories here. Next slide, please. The first plan is to allow each of the speakers to give a brief recap of the concepts, because, again, it's been a while since you've heard the full story. We thought it'd be good to refresh everyone's memory on the main ideas for each idea or each method. So we're going to start with Kelly Dennings, and she'll be talking about doing a brief recap of the social marketing concepts. Take it away, Kelly.
Thanks. I'm just going to briefly mention a little bit about the Social Marketing Association of North America first. So SMANA is a membership organization serving the professional needs of behavior change agents in Canada, the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico, and the United States. We incorporated in 2016, and for those working globally, SMANA is a regional group that is part of a larger federation through the International Social Marketing Association. We have practitioners, students, and academics involved from both the environmental and health fields, and we advance behavior change for social good. Our membership promise is to build a stronger legacy and community of practice, provide assurance that our efforts are scientifically rigorous, facilitate opportunities for networking and learning such as this, and advocate for the advancement and use of social and behavior change strategies. Next slide. We would love for you to join and get involved today. So on the screen, you can see all that you get with membership. We have an Ask the Expert webinar series and a great social marketing listserv that you may want to join, and our own journals and conferences. Regular membership dues are $55 and students pay only $30. You can learn more at our website.
Okay, back to me. Let's do poll number 2. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Knowledge and awareness alone does not change behavior. So submit the poll, and everybody provide their response. Again, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Knowledge and awareness alone does not change behavior. Your answers are really important to this one, because the whole series is about behavior change. Great. Most people are saying strongly agree that knowledge and awareness doesn't get it done all by itself, which is really the best answer here. Does someone agree knowledge is an important part, I think one of the quotes that you often hear is knowledge is not sufficient, but it is necessary. So it is a big part of it, but alone it doesn't get things done. And that's the beauty about the three methods that we were going to discuss again and rediscuss today is it takes lots of different perspectives and lots of different strategies to achieve behavior change. So wonderful. Good answer, everybody. Let's go to the next slide.
Thank you. I want to thank, first of all, Richard and Alex for donating ample amounts of their time to this series. They have just been wonderful. And I, like Shelley, have been excited to work with the Partnership for Food Safety Education. It has been great. And you, Dr. Prue, thank you for moderating today's session. And finally, everybody that's joined us today. It's exciting to have you all on. There are many schools of thought regarding social and behavior change, and you're going to hear a recap of 3 of them today. And we hope through the discussion to highlight their similarities and differences. And I'm just going to talk briefly about social marketing. So in 1971, Professor Kotler coined the term social marketing. It integrates commercial marketing concepts to influence positive behavior change for greater social good. We say it's getting you to brush your teeth rather than getting you to buy the toothbrush. Traditional social marketing came out of the public health field and is very much rooted in theory. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the diffusion of innovation model showing on the screen. This seeks to explain how, why, and at what rate new ideas and technology spread. 2 colleagues of mine, Nancy Lee and David Ward, used this analogy, show me, help me, make me, to depict how social marketing fits with education and regulation, along with the diffusion of innovation curve. This analogy also follows the 20-60-20 rule. It says that 20% of the population may change their behavior due to knowledge and awareness alone, maybe. 60% will sometimes do your behavior but need a little help. And another 20% will probably never do your desired behavior without being required to do it. And we really think social marketing is good for that movable middle. I want to show you one more social and behavior change theory. This is the social ecological model. It's a very holistic way of looking at an issue and provides much insight into the different components that can affect behavior change. Not only do we include changing the individual's knowledge, attitudes, and skills, but their interpersonal relationships also need to support the behavior. Layer on top of that the potential for organizational and community support, such as the built environment. And finally, to sustain long-term behavior change, it might require some written policy. This model is great for systems thinking and to see where your different audiences may be. Community-based social marketing in particular is most often used in the environmental community, and it's rooted in social science. It's a targeted, step-by-step, data-driven process where you work to remove the barriers to your desired action and enhance the benefits. There's often a focus on outcomes, like actual behavior change, versus the output, like number of impressions. On the screen, you're seeing the 5 steps associated with community-based social marketing as described in the book, Fostering Sustainable Behavior by Doug Mackenzie Moore. First, you want to select a behavior that will get you to the outcome you seek, like using a meat thermometer. Next, you want to conduct audience barrier and benefit research associated with that behavior. Why are they not using a meat thermometer? Next, you'll develop strategies to overcome those barriers and increase motivation. And in social marketing, we highly recommend pilot testing a campaign. And then finally, after tweaking, you would broadly implement and evaluate. Step 3 of the social marketing framework just described talks about choosing a strategy to help overcome the barriers and increase motivation. A list of various tools is showing on the screen. However, this is just a snippet of what is available to you. If you were at the Partnership for Food Safety Education Conference in DC in 2017, you might remember the speaker Lou Atkins, who talked about the behavior change wheel. Her group identified 93 different behavior change strategies one could use. So, with that overwhelming ending comment, that's my time, and I'll turn it over to the other speakers.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. Next, Richard, you're on. Talk to us about behavioral economics.
Great, thanks, Shelley. Hello to everyone. Welcome back to everyone who joined for the other behavioral economics webinar, and hello to those of you who did not. Next slide. To give you just a high-level overview of what behavioral economics is, traditional economics assumes that humans are all Mr. Spock, very rational actors. We all make really deliberative, cognitively correct decisions all of the time. We weigh all the costs and benefits. We maximize our utility. We have very stable preferences. We have unlimited attention and deep reservoirs of willpower. Basically, we're robots that make the right decision all the time. Next slide, please. The behavioral economics view is a view in which people are not that, right? We're much more like Homer Simpson than we are like Mr. Spock. We make a lot of decisions based on emotion, a lot of decisions automatically, kind of without thinking about it. The environment has an overwhelming impact on how we behave, and we have very limited attention and self-control. So we're unable to make ourselves get up in the morning every morning at 4:30 to go to the gym, no matter how much we say we're going to or how badly we actually want to do it. Next slide. So just to give you an overview of what a behavioral economics framework looks like, there are various iterations on this depending upon who you talk to, but this is kind of like a high level just overview of what this looks like. The first step is identifying a key behavior. So behavioral economics relies on identifying a behavior, trying to get someone to do something. Then you're going to do a behavioral map, which is basically a hypothesis generating exercise. We try to figure out what are all the steps involved in getting someone to do this behavior, right? Then going through all of those steps and identifying where there might be problems in actually achieving this behavior, right? Every little detail of the environment matters. So how could I go off course without actually wanting to? And the next step is behavioral design, which is where we'd identify all of those what we call behavioral bottlenecks, all of those little things that keep us from achieving our ultimate goal. And then we design something, a behavioral intervention, to try to move us back on course to achieve what we want to. And then we'd have prototyping and iteration, which kind of flows through the entire process, which is we create hypotheses about behavior, we test our hypotheses, we recreate hypotheses, and then with the interventions, we hypothesize what interventions will work, we test those hypotheses, then we recreate our interventions again, and then finally we'll test. And the testing within behavioral economics is often based on randomized controlled trials. So it's much like a medical trial. We have two or more groups, a control randomized into a control, and then treatment groups where you'd have a behavioral intervention given to those treatment groups. And then at the end of your experiment, you would observe the variable of interest, and if it's different across groups, you could say that the treatment was the reason that variable of interest differed across groups. That's all for behavioral economics overview.
Thank you so much, Richard. Alex, would you like to give a recap of human-centered design?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone, and welcome. In the June webinar, we talked about design thinking. If we could go to the next slide. So we talked about design thinking, and at its ethos, beyond the buzzwords, it's a creative process for solving a problem with the people we serve. So if there's one takeaway today that I hope you have and take forward on using design thinking to change behavior, I hope you go back and talk with your boss, your colleagues, or your team about the mantra with people for people when it comes to designing solutions. You don't even have to use the exact phrase design thinking if you think people might not understand it, if they'll push back on it, or if you don't yet feel 100% confident in explaining it. So let me tell you a story. I once had a client ask me which is better, as they wanted to evolve their social marketing approach, especially given advances in digital technology. She asked me, should we be using lean or agile or design thinking, because we're just kind of stuck in this healthy debate. And while healthy debate is good and nuance is valuable, I actually recommended the book Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking. Imagine they actually created a book to help us answer this question. It's about 44 pages. And I shared too that I've also found that jargon can sometimes block adoption and buy-in. So this mantra, with people, for people, is something I've used in talking with colleagues and clients to really boil it down and get to the foundational shift that we're encouraging us to make. And this shift through the design thinking process invites us to reframe our thinking of the people we serve from being receivers to being participants, recognizing we have less audiences in today's world and a reality of people trying to make it through their day. This means our priority, like washing their hands, separating meat from the vegetables, chilling produce, likely isn't their priority. So how do we get our goal of healthy food safety behaviors to align with the goal or jobs people do throughout the day? We listen, we learn, and we empathize, and that's really at the heart of the design thinking process. We then define the problem and recognize our assumptions. We ideate on the best way to solve the problem, and then we sketch and prototype and then test to see what works best. And all along the way, we are checking our assumptions, keeping our eyes and ears open to new learnings, and refining our approach. And at various intersections and points along the way, we are involving people that we serve to help us make decisions, to help us brainstorm, to help us test. So the next slide recognizes that change can be hard. And I wanted to resurrect the slide from the June webinar as a reference for you as you navigate how best to involve the people you serve in problem solving. As we know with social marketing, it's helpful to convey and reinforce the benefits of the change we are seeking. There's an increasing amount of literature on design thinking, and if you remember from the June session, we shared some of the more recent articles also offering support for design thinking. As a quick recap, we talked about a number of tools in the design thinking tool belt, and the list on this slide merely scratches the surface. And many of you are already starting to consider design thinking, or you are already using it. So I wanted to provide you also with a list of additional resources that can help you enhance your practice of design thinking as a part of your behavior change program. So if you have questions on any of these, I'm happy to elaborate as a part of our discussion. And that concludes the recap on design thinking.
Wonderful. Now we're going to hear your perspectives on each of these methods mentioned, sort of engaging either audience research or in the human-centered design, engaging people in a very proactive and active way. I'd like to hear from you guys. How often do you involve your target audience in the development process of products or services, either formatively in the audience research or pilot testing or prototyping things? So if you'll respond to the poll and tell us currently, how often are you involving your target audience in the products and services that you're developing for them? Take a minute and let us know. Is it always, often, sometimes, rarely, or never? Okay. Well, a good mix of folks are involving people in some stage of their process. Definitely, this is very encouraging. During this discussion period, as you write in comments, I'd love to hear how you guys are involving people in the development of your products and services. So this is very encouraging. Definitely room for improvement, though, so it's exciting that you're here. Okay, let's keep going with our discussion. I think that's next. You've heard about the three methods. What I'd like to do now is I've got a series of questions I'm going to ask our panelists to react to, but I also want to invite you to go into the system and either in the question or the comments section, put in any questions or comments you have, because this is your ready access to the experts, and you may have questions that I haven't thought of. So, but I'd love to hear from each of our speakers what they see the upsides and downsides of the approach that they described. Kelly, from a social marketing perspective, what do you see the upsides and downsides of that approach is?
Sure. So I believe social marketing has been around long enough now that it really is an evidence-based methodology rooted in various sciences, whether it be psychology, sociology, and marketing. And so I think this idea of using these theories that have been tested over time makes it a robust framework to use. However, I think with the development of behavioral science and, what Richard mentioned, this idea of the fact that we don't necessarily always behave rationally, I think traditionally marketers, which is where social marketing comes from, has kind of had that mentality that individuals, do have kind of like a mental exchange of the pros and cons associated with something and rationally choose, something that makes more sense. But so social marketing is working on that, and that might just be my opinion. My social marketing colleagues may not agree with me, but that could be the only one downside I see.
Okay, so the upsides would be that it has a good, solid social science base and underpinnings, and the downside might be that maybe it assumes a little bit too much that we make rational choices. Is that a good recap?
Yep.
Okie dokie, wonderful. Richard, what would you see as the upsides and downsides of behavioral economics approach?
Sure. I think there are a bunch, but I'll just talk about a couple. One of the main upsides to the behavioral economics approach is that it's about figuring out how people actually behave. Right? You're creating hypotheses about human behavior and testing them. So you can come up with whatever story you think's happening, and as long as you test it, you can try something and see what happens, right? So it really is, what are people actually doing versus what do we think they should be doing? The downside of this is that there are a lot of psychologies and biases that help describe how people behave and what's likely influencing them. And the more you understand these psychologies, the better equipped you are to hypothesize about what's happening to people. So it takes time to kind of learn and understand the psychologies, and knowledge around them and their applications in different contexts is constantly changing. So that's kind of a barrier to really fully applying behavioral economics in the most rigorous sense. The other upside and kind of downside I would highlight is, I mentioned the rigorous testing, like randomized control trials. That's often associated with behavioral economics. And the upside of that is that you learn something really important about what you're trying to do, and you can, put a randomized control trial around pretty much anything you want, and take some really exciting, outcome away from that. The downside is that to do a randomized control trial often requires someone on the team with a deep knowledge of statistics, econometrics, and experimental design. So that's kind of a barrier to actually applying the randomized control trials to the extent that you want to do the most rigorous form of behavioral economics.
Okay, so the upsides, if I were to recap, the upsides would be that you go deep in understanding behaviors and drivers of behavior, but the downsides might be it might require some expertise that us average ordinary bears don't have. So we might have to recruit somebody to help us from a methodologic or statistical perspective to come up with the evidence that you would want to have in using this methodology. Is that a fair characterization?
Yep.
Okay, great. And Alex, would you like to talk about the ups and downsides of human-centered design?
Yeah, and there are plenty, but I'll try to restrict myself by highlighting some key ones. I really like how design thinking, human-centered design taps into different disciplines. So there's people not only in the social and behavioral sciences that are becoming design thinkers, but design thinking is also popping up in more undergraduate and graduate programs, in certifications, professional development courses, in business schools, in architecture programs, in kind of more graphic design and visual science and things like that. So just as an example, to give a plug to the Social Marketing Association's North American Forum coming up in DC, the keynote speaker is speaking about design thinking, and he actually has an architect background. So he's talking about how to use design thinking in planning healthy communities. So it's really interesting and fascinating to get multiple perspectives into the discussion of how do we create healthier communities and healthier environments. It's also collaborative, so it recognizes that people are dynamic. So it's advancing our understanding and methods for doing audience segmentation and understanding our priority groups beyond merely demographics or even psychographics. So one of the key tools that we talked about in June are the role of personas and helping us really get into the shoes of someone experiencing the problem that we're trying to help solve. And even more recent science is pushing us into this direction of mindset. And sometimes personas alone can be limiting, and you think of that one person and you really get into that user's story, but we're also dynamic beings. And so when you think more about the mindsets that people might have, it helps you identify the emotional drivers and underpinnings behind the behavior and motivations that we have. So design thinking is helping to kind of advance how we understand the science and art behind behavior change. And then on the downside, you still want to make sure that you have the right people at the table. So some people do design thinking and will go talk to people on the street about X, Y, or Z. But if those aren't the people you are trying to serve, then that's not the best use of your time. But maybe if you work with a grocer and talk to people while they're doing their shopping for dinner, perhaps that's more relevant. And then there's also this tension between when do we lean on the quote unquote experts versus maybe the more consumers. And so identifying the best times for when decisions need to be made and mission critical moments to involve consumers can help you make sure you utilize your resources, both in terms of time and opportunity costs and finances, the best.
Okay, so if I were to recap, I would say that design thinking is multidisciplinary and actually can build bridges to new disciplines in terms of bringing people together to solve problems collaboratively, and definitely looking at, again, behaviors from a very sort of systems way and experience at multiple levels. But the downside might be that this whole notion of who's calling the shots when decisions need to be made. Is it the participants or the experts or some sort of negotiation? What data points do you listen to, the science or the experience? That could get a little tricky in there. Is that a good recap?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's so nice to sort of tease out what's different about these, because, you know, there's a lot in common, but there are these little nuanced differences. Which raises the next question for me. For each of the methods, are there certain types of behaviors or behavioral contexts that make your method, that your method would work better for or work especially well for? I'm thinking about, you know, when you try on clothes, you're trying to find a good fit. We've got 3 different models here. What are the behaviors or the behavioral contexts that your model would fit best with? Why don't we start with Alex? You go first this time.
Yeah. So given where design thinking was born back in the product service industries, a great place to apply design thinking is when you're developing a product or service. So if you're thinking about how to reinvent the grocery cart to encourage food separation while shopping, that'd be great for design thinking. If you are working with a co-op on their food safety for food delivery, then that's also a great place for design thinking. It's especially great when you are developing a digital product or tool in particular, because it can help you go from kind of the abstract conversation to getting more tangible quicker. And then it's also great anytime there's more of a journey that you're trying to understand. So if there's more than one behavior that might be at play in that journey, or you're not quite sure which behavior is the true source of what you're trying to address, that can be a great place to also apply design thinking.
That's really helpful. Richard, what do you think about the sort of fitness of behaviors and behavioral contexts for behavioral economics approach?
Yeah, so behavioral economics is really good when we want someone to do something, to make a decision. So we want to get someone to wash their hands. We want to get someone to go to the gym. So we want to get someone to sign up to volunteer or whatever. Behavioral economics is not a panacea. It works best for problems that are behavioral, that we have a specific behavior that we want someone to do that we can identify and track. So that's when behavioral economics is best. And I work with a lot of financial decision-making behaviors amongst low-income Americans. And a big question that always comes up is like, why aren't people saving money? Why aren't they eating healthier, et cetera? And part of the problem, any way you slice it, is that people don't have money, right? And so generating higher incomes might solve part of the problem, but some of these challenges, like, oh, okay, let's try to get people to save money, you can implement some behavioral solutions, but at some level, part of the problem might lie elsewhere. So again, I would highlight the importance of behavioral economics around decision making and getting someone to do a concrete action.
Okay, you raise a good point because a lot of our behaviors are connected to each other. So, I mean, they don't happen in a vacuum. So the notion that saving money is a part of a whole financial strategy that's tied to how much money you make and what your bills are and all that stuff. So they're all connected. So that's helpful. So a key thing is things where there's solid decision-making moments in the process and unpacking them.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Kelly, what kinds of things does social behaviors or behavioral context does social marketing especially fit for?
Well, I just got to say, I'm so excited right now about this discussion, and this is a very selfish desire of mine to have this particular discussion because I'm learning from Alex and Richard so much, but mine were kind of similar, right? So social marketing started in the 60s and 70s with a particular product, mostly in family planning. So there was a condom or birth control kind of thing that you were doing, and it came out of traditional marketing where you were trying to sell a product. I think, though, this is what's so intriguing is both of my fellow panelists mentioned this idea of what Richard was calling behavioral mapping, and I think what design thinking calls almost like the journey map. In community-based social marketing, it's kind of being called like behavioral chains, or where you have these sub-actions. And so I think that's where we all, it gets a little bit more difficult, right? So the example that I was thinking of, if you want somebody to actually like use a neat thermometer, well, there are, things that they need to do prior to them actually doing that behavior you seek. They need to go buy it, they need to learn how to use it. So I think it's interesting that we're all kind of acknowledging this issue of, it's not just a one and done type action or behavior that we're all looking for. But so I think any of us could say that the easiest, things that we could do would be that one and done behavior. But we have different ways of trying to get at those more difficult behaviors that might have sub actions and things like that.
Okay, well, that's great. Again, the connectedness of behaviors and just sort of, we don't act in isolation. We don't act rationally, we act emotionally. So all of the really connectedness and the importance of understanding drivers is one thing that I hear you all saying loud and clear. And certainly the only way you do that is by interacting with people. And I'm seeing a question from Frank. We have wonderful questions chiming in here on the question board here. Let me see, where did it go? It was, okay, Frank says, we have limited budgets. How do we include customers who use our materials or we want to implement our changes in the activities? We have only so much time and so much staff, and our main goal is to conduct, okay, he's doing inspections. So let's talk to the pragmatics of using these models. Dealing with it sort of the time and money factor, because we all have limited amounts of time and all certainly have limited amounts of budgets. And all three of you said the sort of iterative processes and engagement and involvement of people. So I'll start with Richard. What's your advice, or how expensive is this? How time consuming? Talk to how do you do this practically on probably what most of us have are shoestring budgets. Any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, so I'll give kind of two answers. The first is if you wanted to work with like a rigorous behavioral economics consultancy or a lab or a research organization, any of those, typically a consulting project would take 3 to 6 months or so, and it would involve everything from data collection, again, every step of the process I discussed, to behavioral intervention, to testing and evaluation. So, it would take several months at least to do it kind of rigorously. And that definitely is recommended to the extent that you're able to do it. But you mentioned limited resources. And the cool thing about behavioral economics is that really what it is at its core is a series of hypotheses about how people behave. And the amazing thing about it is that you can set up your own hypotheses and kind of test and collect the data, right? So if you have a hypothesis about how to get someone to do something, you can set something up and see how people react. Now, an academic might hear me say this and start screaming like, hey, this is not rigorous, it's not legitimate. You were talking about randomized control trials, this is not that. And all that's correct. There's an acceptable academic standard for presenting conclusions to see, what's going to happen. But, really within the nitty gritty of behavioral economics, it is, how do people actually behave? So, we watch people, what do they do? We talk to them. What were they thinking about? What do we think they don't realize they were thinking about? So there's really nothing stopping you from creating your own hypotheses and kind of testing that, as long as you can get some variable of interest that you're able to measure and have it be really objective and see how people react to that.
So what I hear you saying is people can do this. They just I'm sure I know this group. This is an amazing group of people who have a lot of interaction with food consumers and educators and people who are trying to make good, healthy choices, especially the nutritionists in the crowd, and trying to help people make healthy choices. I'm sure they come up with hypotheses all the time and could probably figure out ways to objectively measure whether what they're doing is moving the dial on things. So it sounds like it's doable. You just have to sort of set up a system for having a declared hypothesis and then measuring it in some objective way, so to rule out your own biases and opinions from the process, so that you could make some conclusions about whether something's working or not. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Alex, why don't you talk about design, human-centered design, and sort of the time and financial sort of aspects of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I fully answer the question, I wanted to note that Richard is using the word hypotheses, which is used in behavioral economics. In design thinking, we use the word assumptions. So similarly to the strategy that Richard was just saying, you could make sure that you jot your own assumptions at different points along the way, and that could be, your individual case study that you're doing about, if I try this, what happens? And then if you shift your strategy, noting what those hypotheses are, your assumptions are. So it's somewhat similar in terms of that strategy for design thinking. There's a spectrum of design thinking, and you could dip your toes or you could go all in. Something that you could do immediately is start to apply it within your own space or your own organization. So you could test it, you could use it on yourselves as the guinea pigs, because if you have a weekly staff meeting, you're going to have that meeting every week. So it's already a time that people are carving out. And maybe there's different methods that, based on what's on that agenda, you could try out to see how that works and if that was a really effective method. Because you might have some meetings where you do the 6 thinking hats method that we talked about in June, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was so worth it. And then you see that there's, maybe there's efficiencies or insights that actually will make your decision making more efficient and use your resources even better and help them go farther. So you can use yourselves as guinea pigs. That's one strategy I would say. And then also you can kind of look at where would be the best place to get people's input. So sometimes what we do is we'll do that on the earlier side, and we'll do more exploratory types of activities. So maybe you can't pay to have incentives to do, more structured audience research, as people might define it for different reasons. But maybe you can go sit somewhere and observe, the environment and what's going on. And you could put yourself in the context of the behavior or the problem that you're trying to solve for, and just see your observations and do kind of, again, your own mini case study. Friends and family might be a great place to start as well. So if you've kind of done some things in a meeting and you think you want to apply it to a project, maybe you do it first with friends and family, and you just say, hey, this is something I'm trying to think about for work. Can I try it with you? And then they get insight into what you do every day, and you kind of get to maybe grow your skill set and your confidence in how you do design thinking, and involve other people into maybe you're sketching what your digital product is, or maybe you're planning out how the campaign is going to be, and they have ideas, and you can see how some of that goes together. So those are some of the strategies that I'd suggest.
Okay. So it sounds like time might be the biggest variable there, not necessarily money. People's time, lots of people's time, the members of your community, the members you're trying to serve, even your organizational. So trying out different methods to see how you sort of discover what our hidden assumptions are and make them much more explicit, so that we can tackle the sort of hidden barriers to performing or even designing things more explicitly to meet needs that we may not even be aware of. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And I would also say there's an assumption behind the question too, that sometimes these things will take a lot more time and a lot more resources, and sometimes it's the opposite, and you find out things are a lot more efficient. So, for example, we were developing a video for healthcare providers, and we were like, what if we get neurosurgeons in a room and ask them how they would develop this video? Which was really groundbreaking for the kind of the time and the moment that we were in. And a lot of people just thought, oh, this could be a disaster. This is not going to go well. We're going to waste time, and we're going to waste, the neurosurgeon's time, and they're not people who have a lot of time to waste. And it actually went extremely well, and they were so engaged and so excited. And as a result, the video, with some follow-up testing, early signs are showing that it's going to be really effective and what the goals were for that video. So even though it might seem like a bigger thing, that's also an assumption. Yeah.
Well, and it speaks to if you invest the time engaging your audience and involving them in whichever of these methodologies you approach, you increase your odds that you're developing a product that they'll want to use and find useful. Because a lot of times we produce a lot of stuff that sits on a shelf, and that's not a very, very efficient or effective use of any type of resource. So that's really important to remember as well. What are the costs of not engaging our audiences in the process? Right. Kelly, would you like to talk about sort of the time and money issues that were involved in using a social marketing approach?
Yeah, I always say that a little bit of research is better than no research, and so I have been a practitioner my whole life with shoestring budgets. And so for me, things like intercept interviews, intercept surveys, in-depth interviews, journey mapping, which comes out of design thinking, photo voice, observations, which Alex mentioned too, or just a plain up, quick lit review can sometimes at least provide you some insight that's better than no insight. And I have some kind of templates that I'm willing to share with people on those things that I just mentioned, the shoestring research options. But I would also say one last thing to this was, and I think it comes out of design thinking, I could be wrong, Alex, but this whole idea of rapid research and prototyping. So I did that in grad school in Panama, and it was like day one, you did research, you went back, you tweaked it, you did more research, and within 5 days, we had a product that we were prototyping with this community in Panama for vector-borne illness. And so I think, again, we talked to maybe like 24 people throughout the week, but they were good interviews, and I felt really good about the product and the intervention that we created. So something's better than nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm looking at the time and I'm being mindful of it. So I want to give you each one last thing to tell the audience, and that is if someone wants to try your approach, where should they start? What's the one thing they should do using behavioral economics, Richard?
Sure. Behavioral economics is had a lot written about it, and there's starting to be a lot more in terms of education, adult education on the topic. So, if you're really interested in behavioral economics, the first thing I would advise is to start just going through the books and reading the books. Some of the top ones I'd recommend are Thinking Fast and Slow, Predictably Irrational, Nudge, The Y-Axis, anything by Richard Thaler, Cass Sunstein, Daniel Kahneman, Dan Ariely. So I just read all of those books, and then from there, there's a lot of other education on the more applied side. So there are a number of behavioral economics societies or associations, including Behavioral Science Policy Association, behavioralscientist.org, writes about the topic extensively in behavioraleconomics.com. So you can read about those, and there are also training opportunities, online trainings, in-person workshops. There's a group called Irrational Labs, which does both online trainings, in-person workshops, and is developing a behavioral economics boot camp, I believe, in the coming year, and there are probably others like it. So those are some ways to learn more and kind of get the applied knowledge, and then you can also, contract a behavioral economics firm to work on a problem that you have, and I think you'll learn a lot from the people who come and help you work on your problems, both in terms of the problems, but also the methodology that will probably serve you as you're thinking more about your challenges.
So the one thing might be two things, actually. Learn more and then learn how to get help if you need it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Kelly, what would be the one thing you would advise folks in adopting a social marketing perspective or approach?
Yeah, really, I think it's just know your audience. Try to figure out a way as much as you can to do some of that shoestring budget type research. And similar to Richard, there'll be a slide in the deck later that has some various social marketing resources. So you can learn more.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we'll get to that next. Alexandra, what would be the one thing you would recommend for folks trying human-centered design?
Yeah, I would start by looking at your programming and reflecting on how you are or are not involving the people you serve in the process, and even sketching out a visual for what that looks like can help reveal opportunities to involve people. I'm a big fan of planning models, which is to say, how will you go about planning and managing the work of the change program in place? And they often serve as your North Star. And oftentimes, because we're so in the day-to-day and we have a limited budget and of energy, of money, of time, that everything feels immediate. And a planning model and sketching that out can help just give you more of that big picture review. CDC is a great resource, CDC Synergy, as a starting point. And in June, we talked about the IDEAS method, which integrates some design thinking components into such a planning model with a checklist. So reflection, identifying areas for integrating the end user perspective, and then also examining your assumptions, your opportunity costs, and maybe there's some key questions you want to better explore and answer. Maybe something needs a reboot and a refresh, and more ideas and inspiration are needed on the table. And lastly, just going back to that mantra of with people, for people, to check in with yourself from time to time.
Okay, so lots of things there, starting with the process, a plan forward, and then keeping people involved in the process along the way so you don't lose your way. No, those are all really good. So I'm just looking at a slide here that sort of says what all these models or approaches agree on, and there's just a lot in common. even though there are some nuanced differences. First of all, one of our poll questions sort of answered this. For some folks, knowledge is enough. They'll move just on knowledge, but that big middle, it's not enough, and we need to do things that help people change their behavior or perform behaviors in a certain way. Certainly, research is a big part of each of these models, and understanding the audiences and finding ways to engage them is really important as well. You heard the next one a lot too: test, pilot, prototype, sort of get feedback on whatever product or service that you've designed, and keep iterating it until it's just right and meets the needs. And then lastly, a really important one, measuring and evaluating how this product or service is getting to the audience, how they're using it, if they're finding it useful, is it having the intended effect on the target behavior that you had initially sort of started the whole thing with. Really, really important to have that feedback loop built in. Next slide. This is the slide that Kelly was mentioned, lots of great social marketing resources, so definitely avail yourself of those resources. Next slide. And with Fight Back, great, our wonderful sponsors. We got lots of behaviors to influence. Our audience is working on food safety, so you can pick check, clean, rinse, separate. All these behaviors are behavior bundles that we really need to understand, because we know that there's a lot of food safety issues that we can spend the next generation influencing. Next slide. I want to thank our sponsors. Shelley, would you like to join us and wrap things up in terms of from the Partnership Food Safety perspective, and tell people how to respond to the survey?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for such a great discussion. It's been wonderful, and we didn't even get all to the questions of the audience, and I think we'll consider, for next year's series, what are some ways we can pick up on some of what you all covered today. So thank you so much. I did want to briefly talk about a resource that is available for people who are just getting started in evaluation. This is a really valuable basic toolbox and guide. It was developed in support with the Food and Drug Administration and based on significant body of research done by a fellow there. So I just wanted to briefly cover this, because this evaluation guide is a good way for you to get started on evaluation, and for you to get more involved in some of these kinds of behavioral change aspects as you develop your programming. We owe a great debt to our sponsors who help keep the Partnership for Food Safety Education going. We're a small staff. We're very committed to health and food safety educators and to consumers, and these sponsoring partners help make it possible for us to do our work. So thanks to them. There are many other partners within the Partnership for Food Safety Education, and Chris has been involved for a long time, the federal agencies. We work very collaboratively on consumer food safety education. It's a wonderful collaboration, and this webinar today is the kind of thing that we do, and we do it again through working together with public and private sector partners. So I do want to recognize our other partners. A final reminder about your CEUs. You can get them now from the handout section here. You will see them in the follow-up email. If you open that and read it, there'll be links to get you to the certificates. And this event will be in our events page under webinar recordings within about 48 hours. So that's another way you can get the CEU certificates. Our next event, we are going to be celebrating the coming of Thanksgiving, and we're doing it at the end of October, so that you as health and food safety educators, we're helping to support you with literally great content that you can promote during the Thanksgiving holiday season. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. We'll also help orient you to some of the great content that the federal agencies put out at this time of year. So please join us on October 30th at 1 o'clock. We're going to do a Thanksgiving food safety overview. We're going to have a guest from the Meat and Poultry Hotline, and we're going to make it super easy for your organization to support your community and the consumers you serve with items and downloads and social media for Thanksgiving. If you're very interested in consumer food safety education, as many of us on this call are, we also hold a great conference. That conference was where the idea for this webinar series was first discussed between Chris and me and Kelly. From Consumers to Chefs, our next conference is in March 2019. And please watch your email for more information on that. Final reminder that there is a survey that will pop up right after this webinar. Please take a moment. We are happy to offer these webinars free, and we can do better, and we can better know who we're serving here when you take the survey. So we so appreciate your taking a minute to do that. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Richard, Alexandra. I'm sorry about some slide funkiness there, Alexandra. Fantastic conversation, and thank you for the time you've given. You've done a great service for a lot of folks who, as Chris said, have a very high level of engagement in their communities and have great potential to reach many people. So we appreciate your expertise today. And thank you again, Dr. Crew. You've been a fantastic partner to the partnership and to all the educators who work in consumer food safety education. You're a great resource for all of us, so thank you.
Happy to participate.
It's been good. All right. Thank you all for being with us today, and stay in touch.